Jim. Jim Sporleader, tell us what you remember and how you got involved in the Danish windmill project.
Well, it all started at a Better Orchard Club meeting when Warren Jacobson was president of the Better Orchard Club, and he had been visiting with Harvey Sorensen. And he invited Harvey Sorensen to come to the meeting because he thought that this would really be a worthwhile project, this windmill, if we could acquire one. And so at the meeting, he talked very briefly about a windmill from Denmark, and then he introduced Harvey Sorensen. And at that time, Harvey commented on all the windmills that he had seen in his trips to Denmark, and how one in Elkhorn would look so very, very nice to have one here. And so, the meeting was held in a room in the fire station, and there wasn't a lot of room in that room where the meeting was. But there was controversy. You could see the men, some of the men, yeah, and some of the men, no, this will never work. We'll never be able to raise enough money to get it. And at the end of his dissertation, Warren spoke again. And Warren had this ability that he could make you rethink what you were thinking before, and make you realize that maybe this is a good project. And at the end of the meeting, Warren come up to me and he said, "Would you be willing to serve on a committee to help promote this windmill?" And I had remembered living in Audubon, and I kept hearing these stories about Elkhorn was going to build a swimming pool. And I, you think about these small towns and taking on a project like that, and here Warren is asking me if I would help with this project. And of course, I again thought of the swimming pool and how it was completed and what a beautiful facility it was. And I said, sure, I would be glad to help you. And this was must have been like in the May meeting. And of course then in July there was always a meeting with a picnic down at the park with all the Better Orchard Club members and their families in a potluck. And of course everybody ate from the potluck, and then the ladies and the children, the ladies, they kind of separated from the men, and the men had their meeting. And of course the highlight of the meeting was the windmill. And of course Warren was chairman of the Better Orchard Club, and he talked at length about the windmill, how he had talked to Harvey, and what a thing it could do for Elkhorn for tourism. And so there was a motion made to pursue possibly buying and getting a windmill from Denmark and bringing it to America. And there was a second, and of course then there was a lengthy discussion, pros and cons. And finally Warren asked for a vote. And it was decided it would just be a voice vote. And it passed. The motion passed to look into getting a windmill from Denmark. And so shortly after that, Milo Anderson's cousins came from Denmark. And of course Milo, boy, he was so enthused about this. And he asked his cousins if they would, when they went back, if they would look for a windmill that was suitable for bringing to Elkhorn. And so they agreed that they would do that. And of course, they were here for about 2 weeks, and they went back to Denmark, and within, oh gosh, it was within 10 days, Milo got word that they had found a windmill, and the owner would possibly consider selling it. And it was a windmill that was in disrepair, but could be repaired and become a working mill. And so Milo replied back to him, pursue it and find out what it would cost to buy the windmill. Well, when he went back to talk to the owner of the mill had an agreement with a group of people over there that who wanted to restore the mill. And this organization didn't have the money to do it. But he really hesitated about selling the mill because these people wanted to restore it. And so he called back, and he had said some figures about what it would cost to dismantle it, get it to the seaport, get it on board ship. And as I recall, they say it was around $40,000. And of course, that's when this telephone conversation between, let's see, there was myself and Howard Sorensen and Milo Anderson, Harvey Sorensen, Gerald Brewer, and I believe that Roy Christian was there too, and had this telephone conversation in the basement of the telephone office, and Howard Sorensen set up the telephone call. And of course, Milo's cousin couldn't talk English, so he was all in Dane, and Howard Sorensen did all the back and forth in English and in Danish, and that's we would have got these figures that, well, it would cost about $40,000. And then he sprung this on us. He said, well, I promised him a trip to America if he would sell the mill. And so he said if he could have a free trip to America, he would sell the mill. And of course, that was the incentive that bought the mill. And of course, then preparations were underway to fund it, and it was amazing. I've never seen anything like it. Within a matter of days, the $40,000 was raised, and the check was on its way to Denmark. And so that's how the mill got started.
So once the windmill came to Elkhorn that cold winter day, what was your feelings?
Okay, I wanted to be here so bad that day, but I had to be all day at a meeting in Audubon. And I felt so bad. I kept thinking, oh, that's being delivered in Elkhorn, I'm not going to be there. And when I got back to Elkhorn, I drove down to where they unloaded it, and I kind of had the same consensus that everyone else did. Wow, what a pile of old timbers. How are we ever going to get this to be a working mill? But the thing about, I was told later that this guy, the driver of the truck, said that this has to be unloaded today. And unless it's unloaded today, you have to pay $100 a day demurrage for this truck to sit here. And that's when they called Slim Jensen over at Audubon. And he brought his heavy equipment over. And then, because there was some really, really heavy, well, that large cast iron wheel had to be removed. And he removed all that, unloaded it, at absolutely no charge. Just did it. Of course, that's the Slim Jensen that I always knew, that he was a very helpful, very intelligent person. But like I said, when I got here, I couldn't believe the pile of junk that was here. And of course, then there was this thing about where we're gonna put the mill. And there was a committee was formed, and we had someone from the Iowa Tourism Council come, and they had some recommendations. But then in the meantime, Warren and Earl had bought that land down there where the mill sits now. And they gave the land to the mill to be built on.
And so what was the game plan?
Okay, the game plan was that there had to be some dirt brought in to bring it up to the level it is now. But Carl Bonison said, well, we need to be starting to dig the footings now, before we get dirt in here. And he said, and there's a possibility that we may have to pile drive pilings down to support the weight of the mill. And so they began with a backhoe digging, and they ran into hardpan, which was a marvelous thing, because hardpan is not going to settle, and that's what Carl said. We don't need pilings. The hardpan will support the mill, and so that's when they began pouring footings. And I had to really admire his ability to build that footing, the dimensions that he had to have, and he had to bring it up. It must have been close to 12 feet. And when it got to the 12-foot level, it had to be the size that it is, so that everything would fit. And as you know, everything just fit like a glove. And so there was a before the construction of the mill began, there was a mill builder that heard of the story, and he said that he would come and he would give some instructions on how to put this mill together. And he met them at a room at the high school. And that's when he said, you need to build build it in the center of a form, and you have to go measure those timbers, and so that when you put those legs up, the timbers are the form is exactly the right height, so you can slip the timbers into those cross pieces. And of course that's what they did. So that's when Gerald Brewer got involved, and with his carpentry skills, built the scaffolding on the inside of the mill. And I was gone. I was gone on the days that they put those 8 legs up. and they was there a crane involved with? There had to have been a crane.
That one
Did,
stand 40,
Did 440 come in and lift those legs?
I believe
Yeah,
that
I
was.
believe that's the way it was. And I remember two Saturdays in a row. Howard Thornton and I went down with our hooks on our belt, and we would climb those timbers, and we'd put those cross pieces in, and those arm braces, and put the wooden pegs in. It was so much fun doing that.
So you guys just used a regular ladder and climbed up at that time with the help of a crane
No,
or gin pole?
no. When we were putting those timbers across, Howard and I went down with our hooks, and we climbed the timbers.
And you were your profession was, so you weren't afraid to
No,
climb?
of course not. No,
Because what did you do for a living?
I was a lineman.
And Howard was a,
Howard was a telephone lineman, and so we were right at home.
and it was fun.
It was fun, and I remember Roy Christensen saying, "Okay, this is number so and so," and he held up the dita. Now this is the way it's got to go, and so Howard and I would put the pieces in place, and they had the wooden pegs, and we'd drive those wooden pegs through the timber, and they fit. That was the thing about it that just amazed me, that the work that was done back in the 1800s when it was built, the professionalism that those carpenters had back then. Oh my!
So back up and tell about the numbering.
Yeah, there was numbers on the legs, those 8 legs, and then those cross pieces had numbers, and they had to correspond with the mortise that they went into, and the braces that went in, they were also numbered. And Roy would look at the model, and of course he would say, "Now this number here, put it against this number here, and that's the way it should go in there." And Howard and I had no problem getting him in it. They just slid in there, and
They fit.
it didn't fit.
And the numbering, you mentioned a model.
Yes, that was a model that they built prior to dismantling the mill, and they put numbers on the model and the corresponding tags on the timbers, and of course those numbers those tags are still on those timbers.
And what would have happened if they hadn't done that?
We wouldn't have got it together. It would have been a whole year putting it together. You'd find the piece of you would like putting the puzzle together.
And did you have enough help?
Oh my, yes. We had ample help all the time. You know, and it was the most interesting part about it was, Lisa, was that Lamont Christensen was in charge of the volunteers to come on a daily basis.
And Lamont did what for a living?
And when they were pouring concrete, for example, Carl Bonson said, we're going to need at least 2 tractors and with dumps on them. And so they would take because the forms were, you know, they would pour it in 4-foot forms, 4 foot at a time, and then they pour 4 more feet. And that's when all the farmers came in with their tractors in their loaders, and they would put the concrete in the loader, and they go over there and they would dump it into the form, and that's the way that was done. And of course, when when it got up that high, there wasn't a lot of tractors around that could reach that 12 foot. And so, but Lamont was able to find farmers that had the loaders that could lift that high.
And Lamont was the local banker.
He was the local banker, and on a daily, at least on a daily basis, Gerald Brewer would be the one that would call down to Lamont, and he would say, we need so many people today, and so, you know, Lamont had all names of all these pools of men, and Lamont knew a lot of the people's skills, what level of skill they had, and that's the people he would call for that particular job, and it worked very, very, very well, and that went on for a long period of time. From the time they started building it and putting that together in around the 1st of April. And of course then there was a snowstorm that came that slowed it up. And from then on it was go, go, go.
Did you find a lot of people were driving to town out of curiosity?
Oh yes, a lot of people come and watch and ask questions. And I would meet people like from Atlantic or Harlan or wherever, and they would say, well, you know, we know what the people of Elkhorn can do, and we know that if they set their mind to do this, that it will happen. And that's kind of the reputation that the people in Elkhorn had. And you know, the people in Elkhorn very, very determined. Once they get behind something, you better get out of the way because it's going.
And it didn't matter if they were Danish or not.
It didn't matter. It did not matter. Well, take me for example. The only qualification that I had to be a Dane is that my great grandfather lived in Holstein, Schleswig, and at the time he was born, Denmark controlled it, and he had a Danish birth certificate. So I don't know if that qualified or not, but the people in Elkhorn, I have to say they accepted Verna and I and our family, and we just became part of the community.
And so you had the sides up, and then what happened?
Well, the sides were up, and then of course, then it was time to think about putting the rail or the geared the cast iron the teeth on this cast iron had to be put on top of there so that when the wind changed, you know. Yeah.
So those.
Yeah, so that this part up here, when the wheel turned,
The wind shaft.
when the wind turned, it changed. It would drive the cap around that rail, that geared rail. Yeah. And so Harvey and Gerald were in charge of that. I don't know where Harvey got all his skills on how to build a windmill, but he had so much knowledge.
It's just like common sense, too,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
was.
Don't you think a lot of it, everybody had something to add?
And then, of course, when that was done, you know, then you had to build you had to get the mill shaft in there when that was completed. And I wasn't here that day, but I remember Gerald Brewer talking about Stan Forty came in with this crane to lift that mill shaft, the large gear. This large gear, and that that drive shaft, and of course the mill, the wind shaft, and that all had to go in before we could complete the cap. But Gerald told me they want to lift that huge drive shaft up there. They got it about 5 foot off the ground, and one of the straps broke. And they were so thankful that it broke then, rather than at the top.
And nobody was injured through the whole.
Oh, through the whole process, maybe a few slivers, and that was the extent of it.
Was there any coffee drink?
Lots of coffee drink. And ladies would bring sandwiches and cookies, and always time for coffee. Yeah.
And the young kids.
You know, the coffee tradition in Elko. Yeah. All you have to do is go downtown and still see it today.
There are a lot of young kids in their 50s.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little.
Yeah, there was high school kids. Now, when it come to build the what do you call the wing, the things that go up and down?
The shutters?
The shutters.
Yes.
Went to the high school, and their manual arts department cut those out, and Gerald had made a jig, because they're curved, and made a jig, and they glued those all together, fastened them in the jig, and that's how that got done. And then they would cut them to size and plane them down, the edges down, and yeah, it was just the effort that was made, just phenomenal.
The shaping of the wings.
Yeah. What about the wings? There was some problems with the sails, the
No.
wooden timbers.
Well, the day that he came in to put the wings in, Stan Forty. Now there was Stan Forty and his dad and Gary Vandervecti, and I was in the basket, the truck we'd borrowed from Iowa Public Service. And Gary Vandervecti, boy, you know, he was a Stan Forty was a bridge builder, and Gary Vandervecti was his right-hand man, and I tell you what, they really knew what they were doing. But we put the first wing in and got it wedged in place, and worked just perfect. Went to put the second one in, and we were putting him in this way. And we had about 3 foot to go, and we couldn't get any further. So I got a hoist off the truck, and I was trying to hoist this in, and it wouldn't go. And Raymond Hemmingson told Harvey Sorensen, "Why don't you just turn it and let the weight of the timber?" And that's what happened.
Your common sense.
Common sense. Yeah, and of course then the holes had to line up for that shaft to go through, and it everything worked so slick that day. And then after that we got the timbers all wedged in, and then we started putting the louvers on, and what a time. And I remember there was a couple of young kids out of high school that were down at the bottom. They were starting at the bottom to put those on, and I was coming down from the top, and that Saturday, you know, I got to go back to that Saturday. When we got down there to put the wings on, wouldn't you believe that the wind was out of the north, and we had to go up there and turn that tail wheel by hand and get it around to be on the south side so we could work.
So you had to hand crank it into it because the fantail automatically keeps
right.
it into the wind, so
Mhm.
you needed it to go in a different direction. It's not
right.
an easy thing.
No, it's not. No, no, it wasn't. And then you know, prior to that, we got to go back to when they put the mill shaft in. And Harvey, Gerald Brewer built those rafters, those curved rafters, and put that plywood on and I just thought, my oh my, what a skill that man had. Because there wasn't any, that part of it didn't come, it was rotten. So, yeah.
Were you around the first day you turned it on?
Yes. Gerald Brewer called and said, you know, Jim, let's try it and see if it'll run. And so we went out there and we pulled the chain and closed the shutters, and it began to turn. Oh, I can tell you what, there was about that much space under Gerald's feet. Oh, he was so proud of that. Yeah.
It was a happy day. And
Yeah.
that was about 1 year from the start that I was able to turn.
November.
Right. It was in
November.
November the 13th. We put the wings in, and the 14th we finished with the shutters. So this would have been about the following Tuesday. And we tried it, and Lacey, you can't imagine the thrill of seeing that turn for the first time. Oh, it was marvelous.
And a lot of people said it couldn't be done.
Couldn't be done. Yep. And then, of course, then there was that organization. What did they call that?
Community Betterment.
The what?
The Iowa State Community Betterment.
Yeah, Iowa Community Betterment. We got involved with that, and Shirley Ross made a scrapbook and sent it to them, and they came out, looked at the mill, had a meeting down there inside the bottom of the mill, at the lower on the concrete floor there. No, the mill house had been built already. No, it hadn't had it.
Not the first
No.
year.
And I always said that in the course of the conversation that went on, and the scrapbook that Shirley had, and Hilda Anderson's Kringler, I said that's what caused us to get the number one.
Yeah, you
That's
won
why
it
we got the number one. That's
For
why
the
we got
state.
first place.
for the state of Iowa.
State of Iowa.
That was $450.
But the thing of it is, Lisa, we went back the next year and took first place again. And it was the only community in the state of Iowa that applied for that got it 2 years in a row. So it says a lot for the project here in Elkhorn of this windmill.
And what was the population of Elkhorn?
About 600 people, 650 people. Yeah.
Including the nursing home.
And then, of course, there was the building of the
No house.
mill house, and Gerald came to a meeting and he said, "I've got a bid from Gary on lumber for it." He said, "I think it's really a good deal." But you know, it was interesting how Carl Bonison and Lynn Johnson's dad, what was his name?
Harvey.
Harvey. About parking in front. And Carl Bonison wanted parking in front. And Johnson didn't want parking in front. And you know, in Carl's wisdom, he said, "Well, he said, I guess we can't go any further than this right here because if you look up the street, here's the lot line. So this is as far as we can go." And so Harvey Johnson agreed with that. And what Carl didn't tell him was that there was parking in front of that the city owned that we could use for parking.
So it worked.
So it worked. Oh, there was those, you know, those all those people that worked on that mill. There was some, at times there was disagreements, but they were always able to work out those disagreements, and never I never heard anyone talk about anyone else about, you know, how you talk about, well, I don't think it's a very good idea. They all compromised and come to a consensus.
That's great.
But you know, Lisa, going back to where Bill had to put two timbers together for the wings, and of course they were straight, but they had to be curved so the tips would clear the mill, and of course they had to be mortises cut all along on both timbers, and Harvey Sorensen and Milo Anderson and Gerald Brewer and Carl Bonison spent days and days and days down there with a couple of routers cutting out those, and then it come time to put these timbers together, and Gerald Brewer said, you know, how are we going to hold these ends down and put a forklift in the middle and lift it up so we can get the curve? I said, let me go to the warehouse and I'll get a couple of anchors, and we'll drill holes and we'll set those anchors there. And so that's what we did, and Gary came out with his forklift and had the timbers all lined up just right, and began to lift them up to get that curve. And when he reached that point, you heard this loud bang, and the mortars all come together, and it took the pressure off, and there was your curve in your wings.
We think that's the next thing we have to do with this windmill.
Mhm.
That's 40 years ago that
Yeah.
you did that.
So the timbers have deteriorated?
We think there's some wood rot
Oh my!
where they go through the
Oh yeah,
poles.
that is
It's a common thing.
yeah, because it never dries out in there, does it?
No. Do you think it's possible for us to do it again?
Well, sure it is. Yeah, there's skilled people that can do that.
Because it needs to run for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely it does. Yeah, you just can't let it set and not run. It's got to be a running, operating mill. Yeah.
Any last words? I know there's so much more you can say, and we can do that for another day. But
I can't tell you how much, what pleasure it was to for the people of Elkhorn to have the confidence in me to name me the chairman of that group when it first started, and I remember Lisa putting out information that we needed to hire a mill manager, and you know we interviewed 6 or 7 people, and you know you and Marcia just stuck out like sore thumbs, and of course then Marcia went on to pursue her nursing career. And I remember going down to Des Moines one day. We needed to get passports, and we needed a raised birth certificate. And so we went over there to get that. They weren't very busy that day. And they said, come back in a couple hours, we'll have it ready for you. So we went over to the State House to go through the State House. Met some people over there, and they said, well, where are you from? Well, we're from Elkhorn. Oh, that's where the windmill is. Do you know Lisa Riggs? So you know your reputation and your professionalism has gone all over the state and all over the country, so to speak. So, you know, we have to congratulate you and on the work and the efforts that you've done down there.
But again, it was the community
Mm-hmm.
that did the hard work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's easy for somebody to come in after it's all done. So
But it's difficult to sustain it and keep it that way. You have to. It's a constant work effort.
takes a village.
Yep.
And
That's right.
we got one.
And I remember, Lisa, after it was built, and of course I remember the first Sunday. I kept thinking, that place has got to be open on Sunday afternoon. We need people to be there. And so I took it upon myself to call people, and I was surprised at how people would be willing to volunteer to go down there and work at the mill, give people tours, sell merchandise, take the money.
And didn't Verna and Shirley Ross?
Mm-hmm. Verna and Shirley Ross were for a year?
A little over a year.
Yeah, a little over a year where did that. And then of course, you know, then you couldn't ask. It got to the point where it was getting so big that you couldn't ask volunteers to come and do it on a daily basis. So that's when decided it was time to get someone to manage it. Yeah.
What about the debt? I mean, there was
Lamont would come and say, at the first year, he'd say, Jim, I need to know, how are you going to retire this debt? And I said, well, you know, the members of the members of the board and I have been talking about that. And this year we hope to retire at least $2,000 to $3,000 of that debt. That's all he wanted to know. And that's when we begin to charge 50 cents to go through the mill. And between that and the proceeds from the sales in the mill house, that we were able to start to retire that debt.
we went from 50 cents to $1
Mm-hmm.
to $3 in 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so bad. Is it?
Not so bad. Nope.
Still a good bargain.
It was still a good. People are still amazed. I remember that the day that there was an older Danish gentleman came, and there wasn't any wind that day, so we couldn't turn the wings. And he stood out there and looked at those wings, and he said, "When those wings go by, do they still go swish, swish?" I said, "Yes, just what they do."
And are you still amazed to see all the cars
Oh yes,
you drive
Yeah.
by?
I sure am. And I enjoyed all the days that I volunteered down there and gave tours of that mill. Oh, it was so much fun. I remember one day there were probably 12, 14 people, and we were standing on the bottom floor, and was talking about the mill. And this young kid, he was probably 8, 9 years old, and he kept talking to his dad. And his dad finally said to him, "You've got to be quiet. We're listening to history here." But Lisa, one of the fondest memories I have of the mill is when Julius Hansen and his wife were here. And I remember Harvey talking about when they met Julius and his wife at the airport in Des Moines. And they started in their car from Des Moines to Elkhorn. And he just couldn't believe it could take that long to get from Des Moines to Elkhorn. And he said once we got here and he saw the mill, he said had tears in his eyes. And then a few days later, in the course of building the mill, there was a well, you've seen that. Is that piece still there? It doesn't fit anywhere. Mm-hmm. And Harvey would look at that, and he would look at that, and he said, I don't know where this goes. I can't find a place for it. And so after Julius got settled, and we went down to the mill, and Harvey said to Julius, "We've got this piece left over, and we don't know where it goes." And so Harvey showed it to him, and Julius began to laugh, and he said, "Oh, we kick that around our mill all the time. It's just a piece. It's laid around. We don't know where it goes. There's no place for it." Yeah. And then one night when Julius and his wife were here, Bertha had a supper for all the board members and Julius and his wife. And she served a 6-course Danish meal. And between each course there was time for conversation. And the conversation that rolled and rolled and rolled. And I remember asking Julius, and of course Bertha was interpreting for me. I said, "Well, what did you think when this gentleman came up to you and wanted to buy your windmill?" And he told Bertha, he said, what was the beer in Denmark?
Carlsberg. Carlsberg. Tuborg.
Oh wow! I thought it was for the Tuborg. Yeah. Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. But then Lisa, when the first day that the mill operated and we ground corn, and Bertha caught the first corn in a wooden shoe, and then she saved a bag full, and she invited us down, the board members all down to her house, and we had cornbread. What a deal that was.
It really worked.
It really worked. Yep.